if you take a stroll through a music conservatory practice wing or just, browse the classical section of an old-school record store, you are almost guaranteed to see him.
Oh, absolutely. It is practically unavoidable.
He is usually depicted as a bust sitting on top of a piano, or maybe a solemn oil painting on a wall.
You mean the white powdered wig, the stiff collar?
Exactly that guy.
The look of absolute unshakable calm.
Yes. He looks respectable, stately, and, let's be honest, maybe a little bit boring. He is the father of the symphony, the father of the string quartet, the bedrock of the classical era. We're talking, of course, about Joseph Haydn.
But here's the thing about that image. It is a total mask.
It is.
It's a disguise. If you think Joseph Haydn was just a boring, buttoned-up musical bureaucrat, you are missing one of the most fascinating, chaotic, and inspiring stories in the history of art.
That is exactly what jumped out at me when we started pulling these sources together. We are not just talking about a composer. We are talking about a walking paradox.
Completely.
This man's life was a massive stack of contradictions.
Just look at the basics. We are talking about a man who was arguably the most famous celebrity in Europe by the end of his life, yet for the vast majority of his career, he had to wear a servant's uniform.
And eat with the kitchen staff.
Right. He was called Father by everyone, Papa Haydn, yet he was childless and trapped in a disastrous, unhappy marriage.
And perhaps most significantly, he was a genius who didn't start as a prodigy being paraded around royal courts like Mozart. He wasn't born into it.
Yeah.
He started out starving. Literally starving.
So today, we're going on a deep dive into the life of Joseph Haydn. We're going to trace his journey from a wheelwright's son in a tiny Austrian village all the way to the frantic, celebrity-filled streets of London.
And we're going to unpack the why behind his music. We have this incredible insight from the sources about how isolation, being physically cut off from the world, actually forced him to invent the classical style as we know it.
Plus, we have to talk about his surprising sense of humor, his surprisingly ruthless business practices.
Oh, definitely.
And the absolutely bizarre fate of his head, his actual skull after he died.
The skull story is wild. It sounds like something out of a horror movie or, I don't know, a heist film.
It is a true crime caper involving scientists, gravediggers, and a blackwood box. We will definitely get there.
Okay, good. But let's rewind. Let's go back to the very beginning to understand where this genius came from. We're in rural Austria. It's 1732. What does the world look like for baby Joseph?
It is humble, extremely humble. Rora was a village right on the border of Hungary.
So not a cultural capital.
Not at all. His father, Matthias Haydn, was a wheelwright.
A wheelwright, so he repaired wagon wheels.
Exactly. He was a tradesman. He also served as the marketplace supervisor. His mother, Maria, had been a cook in a local aristocrat's palace, so this wasn't a musical dynasty.
Right, this isn't the Bach family, where you were practically born with a violin in one hand and a sheet of manuscript paper in the other.
No, not even close.
So where did the music come from? Was it just a genetic fluke?
Well, not entirely. The sources tell us that while his parents couldn't read music, they were musically illiterate in the technical sense. His father was an enthusiastic folk musician.
Okay.
Matthias had taught himself the harp, and the family would frequently sing together with their neighbors.
I love that image. It's a home filled with music, but it's grassroots music. It's folk songs, not symphonies.
Exactly. It was communal. But they noticed quickly that little Joseph had something special. He had a perfect ear, a beautiful voice, and a rhythm that a wheelwright's son usually doesn't possess.
And this leads to the first major turning point in his life. At age 6, his parents make a really tough decision.
A huge one.
6 years old. I have a nephew that age. They are still babies, essentially.
They realized that in Roro, he wasn't going to get the training he needed, and in the 1700s, there was no safety net.
Right.
If you had a talent that could lift you out of the peasant class, you had to exploit it. So they accepted a proposal from a relative named Johann Matthias Frank. He was a schoolmaster and choir master in a nearby town called Hainburg.
And the deal was that Joseph would go live with Frank to be apprenticed. And just so we are clear on the timeline here, he never lived with his parents again, right?
That's right. At 6 years old, he was sent away. And the sources paint a pretty grim picture of this time with Frank. Haydn later recalled that life in the Frank household was hard. He said he was frequently hungry.
Ugh, there's that theme.
And humiliated by the filthy state of his clothing.
That detail really stuck with me.
Yeah.
You picture these great composers in velvet coats and wigs, but here is a 6-year-old Haydn, ashamed because his shirt is dirty, he has spots on his clothes, and he isn't getting enough to eat.
It was neglect, plain and simple. But he was learning. That was the trade-off.
Yeah.
He learned the harpsichord and the violin very quickly, and most importantly, he sang treble parts in the church choir. And that singing ability was his ticket out of Hainburg.
Because scouts were looking for talent.
Exactly. In 1739, Georg Reuter, the music director at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, we are talking the big time now, was visiting Hainburg looking for choir boys.
This is like a scout from the major leagues showing up at a Sandlot game.
Precisely. He hears Haydn sing, he sees the potential, and he makes an offer. Haydn passes the audition, and by 1740, he moves to Vienna to live in the Kapellhaus next to the cathedral.
So on paper, this looks like a huge win. He is in Vienna, he is at the cathedral.
It should have been.
Surely his quality of life improved.
You would hope so, but no. Musically, it was an improvement because he was hearing great art. Physically, it was still a struggle. Reuter, the director, didn't really care much about the boy's well-being.
So Haydn was still not being properly fed.
Still hungry. It's a constant. In fact, Haydn later told a biographer a really heartbreaking detail. He said he was motivated to sing his absolute best, specifically so he would get invited to perform for aristocratic audiences at private parties.
Because he wanted the applause, the recognition.
No, because at those parties, the singers were served refreshments.
No way.
He was literally singing for his supper. He knew that if he nailed the high C, he might get a biscuit and a glass of wine.
That is wild. It really grounds his ambition in just basic survival. But what about his education? If he is at this prestigious cathedral for 9 years, he must be getting world-class composition lessons, right?
You would think so, but the record shows Reuter gave him only 2 lessons in theory or composition in 9 years. 2, and nearly a decade.
That is almost negligent. So how on earth did he learn to write music? He became the greatest composer of his age.
He learned by osmosis. He was surrounded by professional music every day. He absorbed the structure of the liturgy, the sounds of the orchestra, the choral writing, just by being immersed in it.
So it was all practical, no theory.
Almost zero formal training. It was learn by doing in the most extreme sense. He had to figure out the puzzle of music by himself.
And then comes the inevitable biology problem. He is a choir boy. He hits puberty.
The career killer for a treble. By 1749, his voice breaks, and this wasn't handled delicately. Empress Maria Theresa herself, the ruler of the empire, complained to Reuter. She said Haydn's singing didn't sound like music anymore. She said it sounded like crowing.
Ouch. A performance review from the Empress herself. That is tough to recover from.
And then the breaking point. Haydn, being a teenage boy, probably frustrated, probably hungry, probably bored, pulled a prank.
Of course he did.
He snipped off the pigtail of a fellow chorister during a service.
I love that this is in the historical record. The father of the symphony, the genius of the classical era, snipping pigtails like a schoolyard menace.
It makes him so human, doesn't it? But Reuter was not amused. Haydn was caned on the spot and then essentially thrown out onto the street.
So now he is roughly 17 years old. He has no job, no home, no money, and he is alone in Vienna.
It is the starving artist archetype before it was a cliche. He was homeless.
Wow.
He was taken in by a friend, Johann Michael Spangler, who lived in a crowded garret, a tiny attic room. Haydn had to hustle immediately. He worked as a street serenader, playing violin on corners. He worked as a music teacher for peanuts.
Just scraping by.
Eventually, he got a job as a valet accompanist for an Italian composer named Nicola Porpora.
Valet accompanist sounds like a polite way of saying servant who also plays piano.
That is exactly what it was. It implies he wasn't just playing, he was cleaning boots, brushing coats, and probably emptying chamber pots.
But Porpora was a master.
A real master. In exchange for the menial labor, Porpora taught him the true fundamentals, as Haydn put it. This was his graduate school.
But the most impressive part of this period, to me, is his self-education. He didn't just wait for Porpora to teach him.
Right. Because he couldn't afford a university or a master teacher on his own, he bought textbooks. He scraped together money to buy a famous counterpoint text called Gradus ad Parnassum by Fuchs.
We should probably define that. What is Gradus ad Parnassum?
It is basically the Bible of counterpoint, the art of weaving different melodic lines together so they work harmonically. It is incredibly dry, technical, mathematical stuff.
Like music theory homework.
The hardest homework. Most people fall asleep looking at it. But Haydn obsessed over it. He kept it by his bedside. And he also got his hands on the keyboard sonatas of C.P.E. Bach. That is, Johann Sebastian Bach's son.
And C.P.E. Bach was doing something different, wasn't he?
Very different. His style was called Empfindsamkeit, which translates to sensitive style. It was emotional, erratic, expressive. Haydn said, "I did not leave my clavier till I played them through." He analyzed them, broke them down, and taught himself how to structure a piece of music.
This is crucial. Haydn was largely self-made. He built his own education from scratch in a freezing attic.
Totally. He even wrote his first opera around this time, The Limping Devil.
Which was actually a hit.
It bore some traction, until the censors shut it down for offensive remarks.
Classic. But he also noticed something interesting around this time. Shops were selling his music.
Yes, he had been giving copies of his music away to people just to get it out there, and suddenly he sees them for sale in shop windows.
And he wasn't getting paid for it.
Nope. Copyright was a mess back then, but it proved one thing. People liked his sound. He was gaining a reputation.
And that reputation eventually leads to the patronage system. He gets a job with Count Morzin, writes his first symphonies, gets married, which we will definitely come back to because that is a soap opera in itself.
So it is.
And then in 1761, he gets the job that defines his life. He is hired by the Esterházy family.
And to understand Haydn, you have to understand the Esterházys. They were immensely wealthy. We are talking about one of the richest families in the Austrian Empire.
Like billionaire level rich.
Oh, yeah. They had their own army, their own laws, their own massive territories.
So he has made it. He has a steady paycheck. But this wasn't like being a modern composer in residence where you get a grant and do what you want, was it?
Not at all. The sources are very clear on this. He was a house officer. He wore livery, a blue uniform with gold braiding.
He was a servant.
He was. His job was to run the orchestra, play chamber music, mount opera productions, and compose whatever the prince wanted, whenever the prince wanted it. And the family moved between their palaces, Eisenstadt, and the rural, massive palace called Esterházy in Hungary.
And this brings us to that key insight you mentioned in the intro. The location matters.
It matters immensely. Esterházy was in rural Hungary. It was built on swamplands that the prince drained to build this Hungarian Versailles. It was glorious, but it was isolated.
And this is where that quote comes from.
Yes, listen to what Haydn himself said about this time. "I was cut off from the world. There was no one to confuse or torment me, and I was forced to become original."
Forced to become original.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful concept. It completely flips the idea of inspiration on its head.
It really does.
Usually we think artists need to be in the city, surrounded by other artists, going to parties, hearing the latest trends.
Right, but think about what that actually does. If you are in Vienna or Paris, you are constantly hearing the latest trends. You are worrying about what the critics think. You are subconsciously trying to fit in or stand out in a crowded market.
It creates a feedback loop where everyone starts to sound similar.
Exactly. Haydn didn't have that. He had his orchestra, he had his prince, and he had silence.
So if you wanted to try something weird with the rhythm,
Nobody stopped him. There was no rival composer next door to say that's illegal.
if you wanted to restructure the sonata form,
Why not? The prince just wanted good music. He didn't care about the academic rules of Vienna.
so the isolation was an incubator.
Precisely. This environment allowed him to experiment without fear. And that experimentation is what solidified the forms of the symphony and the string quartet. He wasn't just following rules, he was writing the rule book because he was the only one playing the game out there.
He treated the orchestra like a laboratory.
Yes, but he still had a boss to please. And Prince Nicholas had some specific, let's call them whims.
Oh yes, the baritone.
The baritone.
Explain this instrument to me, because looking at the diagrams in our notes, it seems like a nightmare to play.
It is a very rare instrument, sort of like a bass viol or a cello, but it has a set of plucked sympathetic strings behind the neck.
Yeah.
So you have to bow the front strings and pluck the back strings with your thumb at the same time. It is incredibly difficult to master.
And Prince Nicholas loved it.
He was obsessed with it. And because the prince loved it, Haydn had to write for it.
How much did he write?
He wrote about 200 works for the baritone.
200.
200, just to keep the boss happy.
Imagine being the greatest composer in the world and having to churn out 200 pieces for a weird, obscure instrument just because your boss thinks it's cool.
It shows his discipline, but it also shows his political savvy. He knew how to manage the prince.
Yeah.
He knew that if he kept the prince happy with the baritone, he could get away with more experimental stuff in the symphonies.
Speaking of managing the prince, there is the famous story of the Farewell Symphony. This is one of my favorite stories in music history because it feels so passive-aggressive in the best way.
It is the ultimate musical protest. So set the scene. The musicians are stuck at the summer palace, Esterházy. It is late in the season. It is getting cold.
They're all homesick.
They want to go back to their families in Eisenstadt, but the prince keeps extending the stay. They are miserable, so they come to Papa Haydn and ask for help.
They can't just go on strike. They're servants. They could be fired or jailed.
Exactly. So Haydn writes a symphony, Symphony No. 45. The first three movements are intense, stormy, very serious, but the final movement starts fast and energetic, and then, and this is highly unusual, it starts.
It just stalks.
It slows down to adagio.
Yeah.
And then the choreography starts.
Right.
While the music is playing, one by one, the musicians stop. First, an oboe player finishes his phrase, blows out the candle on his music stand, packs up his instrument, and walks off stage.
And then a horn player. Then a bassoon. So the music literally thins out, visually and sonically.
Exactly. The stage is getting darker and quieter. The texture gets thinner and thinner. Eventually, it is just two violins left, playing Haydn himself and the concertmaster, Luigi Tommasini.
Wow.
They play this soft, fading melody on muted strings. Then they blow out their candles and leave. Silence.
And the prince? Did he get angry?
No, he got the message. He reportedly said, well, if they're all leaving, we might as well leave too.
And they left the next day.
The court returned to Eisenstadt the next day.
That is genius. His labor negotiation conducted through a symphony.
It shows that Haydn wasn't just a music machine, he was a leader. He looked out for his people. That is why they called him Papa. He protected them.
But let's look at the man behind the Papa label. Because the sources suggest his personal life wasn't all warm and fuzzy. It wasn't exactly a happy home life.
No. We touched on his marriage earlier. In 1760, he married Maria Anna Theresia Keller. It was, by all accounts, a disaster.
Why was it so bad? Was it just a mismatch?
Well, for one, there is the awkward fact that Haydn had actually been in love with her sister Therese, but Therese became a nun. So the father basically said, we'll take the other one. So he married the sister.
That is a recipe for resentment from day one.
And beyond that, they just weren't compatible. She didn't care about his music at all. Legend says she used his original manuscripts for curling paper for her hair or as linings for baking pastries.
No. That hurts my soul.
Imagine that priceless symphony is being used to bake tarts.
Unbelievable. And they had no children.
No. The sources bluntly state that both took lovers. But because of the strict Catholic laws of the time, divorce was impossible. They were stuck together.
That must have been incredibly lonely. To be the most famous man in Europe, called father by everyone, but to go home to a house where your work is used as baking paper.
It was. And maybe that loneliness fed into his work ethic. He buried himself in the music.
But there was another side to his character that contradicts the Papa image. The business shark. The sources mention sharp practice. That sounds ominous.
Later in his career, Haydn realized his worth. He was tired of being a servant. He would sell the same piece of music to 3 or 4 different publishers in different countries at the same time.
So he'd sell it to a guy in London, a guy in Paris, and a guy in Vienna.
Telling each of them they had the exclusive rights.
Which today would get you sued into oblivion.
Oh, it is fraud, basically. But copyright law was in its infancy. And you have to remember his background. He had been starving in a garret.
Right, he knew what poverty felt like.
He was determined to maximize his income. He was an honest man in his conduct with friends. But in business, he was ruthless. He wanted financial security.
Let's pivot to the music itself. We have established he invented or solidified these forms. But what does his music actually sound like compared to the guys who came after him? What distinguishes a Haydn symphony?
Well, one key thing is something musicologists call monothematicism.
Okay, that is a big word. Break that down for us.
Think of Mozart. Mozart is like a melodic fountain. He throws out theme after theme, contrasting melodies, an abundance of ideas.
It is like a buffet where every dish is different.
Exactly. Haydn is different. He often takes one single theme, one little musical idea, maybe just a few notes, and builds the whole movement out of it.
So he recycles it.
He explores it. He changes the key, he changes the rhythm, he chops it up, he turns it upside down, he gives it to the bassoons, then the violins.
So he is efficient.
He is economical. It is like a chef making a 5-course gourmet meal using only a potato. It shows incredible intellectual rigor. It is about exploring every single possibility of a single idea. It's tight, it's cohesive.
And then there is the Sturm und Drang.
Storm and stress. This was a cultural movement in literature, think Goethe. But for Haydn, it appears in the music of the late 1760s and 70s. Suddenly, his music gets dark.
Minor keys.
Minor keys, jagged rhythms, intense emotion. The Trower Morning Symphony comes from this time. It is passionate music. It breaks the stereotype of the polite wig-wearing background music. It's angry, it's sad.
But on the flip side, he is also funny. The outline mentions the joke.
Haydn is considered one of the funniest composers in history. He loved practical jokes in real life, and he put them in his music. He realized that the audience expects certain things. They expect a melody to go here or the music to end there, and he loved to trip them up.
The most famous one being the Surprise Symphony.
Right. Symphony No. 94. It starts with a simple, quiet, folk-like tune, very gentle. You find yourself leaning in, getting lulled into a sense of security.
Bam!
A massive fortissimo chord with the timpani drums crashes in out of nowhere.
To wake up the audience.
Legend says it was to wake up the sleeping patrons after a big dinner, but really it was about subverting expectations. He wanted to make you jump. He also did false endings.
False endings.
He would write a passage that sounds exactly like the end of a piece, big cadence, resolving chord, silence, the audience starts to clap.
And then the orchestra starts playing again.
Yes, he was toying with them, he was winking at them.
I love that. It shows he was engaging with the audience, not just playing at them. He knew how they listened, and he played with those habits.
Exactly. He treated the listener as an active participant.
So he spends 30 years with the Esterházys, but nothing lasts forever. In 1790, Prince Nicholas dies.
And this is the turning point. The new prince, Anton, isn't interested in music. He fires the orchestra. He keeps Haydn on the payroll as a pensioner, but basically says, "You are free to go. We don't need you here."
So at age 58, Haydn is suddenly a free agent.
And a very famous one. An impresario named Johann Peter Salomon rushes to Vienna and says, "Come to London. I will make you rich. I will make you a star."
And Haydn says yes. This part of the story feels like a movie. The country mouse goes to the big city.
It really was a culture shock. He traveled to Calais and crossed the English Channel on New Year's Day, 1791. The source notes that at age 58, this was the first time Haydn had ever seen the sea.
Can you imagine seeing the ocean for the first time at 58? That scale.
And then arriving in London, which was the largest, loudest, busiest city in the world. The smog, the noise, the commerce, and the reception was insane. He wasn't a servant there. He was a superstar.
The papers reported his every move.
Haydn is walking in the park. Haydn is dining with the king. Audiences flocked to his concerts.
And the money was good.
The money was incredible. He made a net profit of 15,000 florins from his London trips. To give you context, a nice house in Vienna cost about 1,300 florins.
He made enough to buy 10 houses.
It is, forget about the starving years, wealth.
And he had a life-changing romance, too. He met Rebecca Schroeder, a widow. They had a very close, intense relationship. She wrote him beautiful love letters.
It was perhaps the happiest time of his life. He was free, he was rich, he was loved, and he was celebrated.
And the music reflected that. The London symphonies.
Yes, the surprise, the military, the drum roll, the London. These are grand, confident works. They are designed for big public concert halls, not private palaces. You can hear the ambition in them. They are louder, bolder.
We also have to touch on his connection to the other two giants of the era, Mozart and Beethoven. Because looking at the timeline, they all overlap.
It is the holy trinity of the classical style. Haydn and Mozart were actually close friends, despite the age difference. Mozart was much younger, but Haydn respected him immensely.
They played in string quartets together in Vienna.
Which is just the greatest supergroup of all time. Just casual jamming.
Right.
It really is. And Haydn was incredibly humble about Mozart. He famously told Mozart's father, "Your son is the greatest composer known to me either in person or by name."
He recognized Mozart's genius immediately.
He didn't get jealous. He was in awe. When he went to London, he actually wanted to take Mozart with him, but Mozart died before the second trip could happen. Haydn was devastated.
Beethoven.
That was more complicated. Haydn met a young Beethoven in Bonn on his way to London. He saw the talent. Later, Beethoven came to Vienna to study with Haydn.
So Haydn was Beethoven's teacher.
Yes, but they were very different personalities. Haydn was the polite, polished courtier, the man in the uniform who knew how to bow to a prince. Beethoven was, well, Beethoven.
Rude, messy, rebellious, fiery.
Exactly. I can imagine they clashed. They did. Beethoven famously said he learned nothing from Haydn.
Which is harsh.
It is unfair, and it isn't true. If you look at Beethoven's early symphonies, the structure is pure Haydn, but it shows the tension. Haydn called Beethoven the Grand Mogul because he was so arrogant, but Haydn taught him, he took him to Eisenstadt.
So Haydn built the house that Beethoven lived in.
That's a great way to put it.
So Haydn returns to Vienna a rich celebrity. He is the grand old man.
He is. He settles into a large house in the suburbs. He is done with being a servant. He writes the Emperor's Hymn, which becomes the Austrian national anthem.
And later, The melody for the German national anthem. Oh, I didn't realize that melody was Haydn.
It is. He wrote it because he was inspired by hearing God Save the King in London and wanted Austria to have something similar to rally the people against Napoleon.
And he writes his massive oratorios, The Creation and the Seasons.
The Creation is huge, monumental. It tells the story of Genesis. And he took his time with it. He said, I spent a long time on it because I wanted it to last.
He was writing for posterity now, not just for next week's dinner party.
Exactly. He knew he was writing for history.
But then the decline starts.
It is a tragic decline. Around 1803, he starts suffering from what was likely arteriosclerosis. He becomes weak, dizzy, unable to focus. And the tragedy is that the music didn't stop in his head.
That quote you found in the sources is heartbreaking.
It is one of the saddest things I have read. He said, musical ideas are pursuing me to the point of torture. I cannot escape them. They stand like walls before me.
He could hear it, but he couldn't write it.
Exactly. He told a friend, I am really just a living clavier, a living piano. The music is there, the keys are there, but no one is playing it.
He spent his final days playing his Emperor's Hymn on the piano for comfort.
And history was literally crashing in around him. It is May 1809. Napoleon's army is attacking Vienna.
This is literally happening outside his window.
Cannonballs were falling near his house in Gumpendorf. The walls were shaking. His servants were terrified, huddled in the hallway. But Haydn, frail as he was, reassured them. He said, don't be afraid, children. Where Haydn is, no harm can reach you.
That is such a boss move. I am Haydn. Cannonballs don't scare me.
It shows his confidence. He knew who he was. And in a bizarre twist of chivalry, when the French occupied the city, a French officer named Sulamy actually came to the house to pay his respect to the dying composer.
The enemy officer comes in.
Yes. He enters the house, goes to Haydn, and sings an aria from The Creation to him.
That shows the level of respect he commanded across Europe. He transcended the war.
It does. Haydn died shortly after, on May 31st, 1809.
But as we promised at the beginning, that is not the end of the story.
No, this is where it gets macabre.
We promised a story about his head.
So Haydn is buried. A quiet, simple burial. But shortly after the burial, two men, Joseph Karl Rosenbaum and Johann Nepomuk Peter, bribed the gravedigger to dig up the body.
Wait, why? Who are these guys? Are they grave robbers?
Sort of. They were adherents of phrenology.
Phrenology is that pseudoscience where they thought the bumps on your skull determined your personality.
Exactly. It was all the rage back then. They believed that genius could be physically located in the bone structure. They wanted to see if Haydn had a music bump on his skull.
They wanted to own the physical manifestation of his genius.
Yes. So they bribed the sexton, dug up the fresh grave, cut off his head, and stole it.
They stole Haydn's head.
They did. They took it home, cleaned it, bleached it, and kept it in a black wooden box. They treated it like a trophy.
Meanwhile, Haydn's headless body remained in the grave.
For years.
When did anyone find out?
It wasn't until 1820. Prince Nicholas II, the grandson of Haydn's old boss, wanted to move the body to Eisenstadt for a proper monument. They opened the coffin to transfer the remains and, oops.
No head.
Just a wig resting on a pile of bones.
That must have been an incredibly awkward conversation.
The prince was furious. He launched an investigation. He called the police. Everyone knew Rosenbaum and Peter had it because they had been showing it off at parties.
So the police go to get it back.
They tried, but the thieves were slippery. They gave the police a different skull.
No.
They claimed it was Haydn's, but it wasn't. The prince buried the fake skull with the body.
So for a while there was the wrong head in the grave?
Yes. And the real skull stayed with the thieves. On his deathbed, Rosenbaum gave it to Peter, who gave it to the Society of the Friends of Music in Vienna. It sat in a museum display for decades.
You could go look at Haydn's skull in a glass case.
While his body was in Eisenstadt. Exactly. It wasn't until 1954, 145 years after his death, that the skull was finally reunited with the body.
1954.
There was a huge procession. They opened the tomb at the Bergkirche in Eisenstadt and placed the skull with the rest of him.
That is recent. That is in the era of rock and roll.
It is. It took that long to make him whole again.
That is just unbelievable. The man who created so much structure and order in music, who invented the symphony, ended up in pieces for a century.
It is a strange, chaotic end to a very disciplined life.
So let's bring this all together. We have looked at the starving boy in the attic, the uniformed servant in the swamp, the isolated genius, the business shark, the celebrity, and the headless corpse. What is the big takeaway here?
I think for me, the takeaway is about the power of constraints. Haydn didn't have the freedom of a modern artist for most of his life. He had a uniform, a boss, and a remote location. He was trapped.
But instead of letting that stifle him, he used it.
He used the isolation to look inward and invent a musical language that we still speak today.
And turned the prison of Esterházy into a laboratory.
Exactly. He proved that you don't need total freedom to be creative. Sometimes boundaries force you to be more creative than you ever would be otherwise, and he did it with a spirit of optimism. Despite the bad marriage, the hunger, the servitude, his music is overwhelmingly full of joy and life. He once said he wanted his music to provide a spring of relief to people who are weary and worn.
And I think he succeeded. Whenever I listen to Haydn, I feel better. It's sane music in an insane world.
Without a doubt.
Before we go, here's a thought to chew on. We talked about how the phrenologist stole his head to find the music bump. They were trying to locate his genius in a piece of bone.
Right. They thought they could hold it in their hands.
But after hearing his story, isn't it obvious that his genius wasn't in his anatomy?
It definitely wasn't in the bumps on his head.
It was in his resilience. It was in his ability to say, I am cut off from the world, so I will create a new one. It makes you wonder, if Haydn had been born in Vienna with every advantage, if he had been rich and well-fed and free, would he have been Haydn?
Or did he need the struggle to become the father of the symphony? That is the question.
I think the struggle made the man. Thanks for dining deep with us. Go listen to the surprise symphony and wait for that drum beat, and try not to jump. We'll catch you on the next one.